Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the first event of Wildlife Week 2023, and I'd personally like to thank each of you for taking the time to participate in our webinar today. So my name is Frankii Rouse, and I'll be your facilitator today. I've worked at OSRL for almost 6 years, mostly in the response department, where I've responded to incidents around the world. And I have chaired the OSRL Wildlife Core Group for the last 3 years, but recently stepped in to cover our Wildlife Preparedness and Response Manager, Paul Kelway, while he goes on paternity leave for the next 6 months. So again, I welcome you to Wildlife Week, and it's a dedicated event that's hosted by OSRL, which aims to promote wildlife preparedness and response good practice and look at how this has been applied regionally around the globe. So today we'll begin by shining a spotlight on why early engagement of stakeholders in wildlife preparedness is absolutely crucial to success. And we've got an overview of a contingency planning workshop in Nigeria, which was put on as part of the Global Initiative for West, Central and Southern Africa, or otherwise known as the GI-WACAF project. I'm pleased to introduce our two guest speakers, Lauren Ferenga from ITOPF and Monica Stassen from SANCCOB, who will both be presenting on how they brought those stakeholders together to promote the integration of wildlife into spill response planning. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Frankii. So I'm going to start off with a few slides and then Monica will finish up. So Monica, if you mind going to the next slide, please. So yes, as Frankii said, we held a workshop in Nigeria in June of this year, and this was under the Global Initiative for West, Central and Southern Africa, so GI-WACAF initiative. GI-WACAF was launched in 2006. It partners with ITOPF and the IMO, and it covers about 22 countries in that region. So Monica and I were invited from our respective organizations to help facilitate this workshop. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background to Monica and I tried to get photos of both of us in the middle of the sentence because that always adds a little bit of life and good value. So Monica, did you want to introduce yourself first and I'll go?
Sure. So hi everyone, my name is Monica and I am the Preparedness and Response Manager at SANCCOB. So SANCCOB is a seabird rehabilitation center located in Southern Africa. I've been at SANCCOB for just under 2 years, and my role is primarily, as it sounds, to manage SANCCOB's preparedness and response when it comes to oil spills, but also to disease outbreaks and mass abandonment. So something that we've noticed here in South Africa is a lot of these sort of bigger events occurring, these sort of disasters and happening, which involve a much larger response. And so the role was broadened to cover those two. I have a background in ecology and I did my honors on sharks and my master's on marine mammals before spending 7 years working in fisheries conservation at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and then now moving to birds. So I've pretty much done half of the marine system. My current role involves a lot of preparedness activities, training, awareness raising, working alongside government and industry to manage their to implement better practices for preparedness, specifically around wildlife, and in and amongst responding to spill events. Thanks. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Monica. That was a really good introduction. So I am Lauren Ferenga. I'm a technical advisor at ITOPF. ITOPF is a global organization that promotes effective spill response to marine pollution incidents. So we were born and bred out of oil spills, but now we respond to all kinds of pollution events from shipping incidents. So that can be hazardous noxious substances, but also a variety of other substances that are carried, for example, on container vessels. So something that's kept us quite busy in the recent years is spills of plastic. Myself, I'm a biologist. I've worked as an ecologist in the UK for about 6 years prior to joining ITOPF. I've now been at ITOPF for 5-6 years, and I'm currently based in the Singapore office. So I think that's a good background for both of us, and we'll move on to the next slide. So as I said, Monica and I were asked to help facilitate a workshop in Nigeria on behalf of GI-WACAF in June this year. So it was a 3-day workshop, 4-day workshop, hosted by the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, so NOSDRA. There were 126 participants over the 4 days, and they came from a variety of different stakeholders in Nigeria. That was a lot of government officials, a lot of government representatives, but also from oil industry globally and in Nigeria, as well as wildlife response organizations in the region, and myself, Monica, and Anne, who was from GI-WACAF. So I think that's a good opening ceremony picture. So the objectives of the workshop, and we'll go into a little bit more of what topics were covered and some of the outcomes, but the primary objective was to present and provide training to relevant stakeholders in Nigeria on the scope of oil wildlife preparedness. And we wanted to do that through delivering technical presentations, looking at case studies as well, but also trying to be as interactive as possible. So rather than just giving out information, we wanted to try and receive as much information as possible and make it as worthwhile a workshop for all the participants. My understanding is that it was actually requested from the Nigerian government that this workshop take place on oiled wildlife in particular. So there's definitely an interest in this topic, and so we wanted to make it as worthwhile for the participants as possible. Next slide, please. So some of the topics covered. What was interesting from the facilitation of both myself and Monica is that ITOPF, while we are involved in oiled wildlife response, it's not our specialty. So what we wanted to do is deliver oiled wildlife response in the context of the large oiled wildlife response in the context of larger oiled response. So what we tried to deliver was looking at global pollution events and what that looks like. Obviously, Nigeria does have a bit of a different background to oil spills than, for example, what we would achieve in the UK. But it was looking at the context of the global pollution problem, and then looking at spill response as a wider organization and how oiled wildlife would fit into that. So some of the topics covered, we looked at just generally the impact of oil on the environment, but also therefore going a bit closer and more zoomed in into impact on wildlife as well. And really the importance of oiled wildlife contingency plans, so how that loops back into the larger national oil spill contingency plan. And Monica delivered some really good really good presentations on that topic. We also looked at, yes, as I said, impact of oil on the environment. And something I think that was really interesting and is always great to put things into context is case studies. So I myself delivered a few case studies that ITOPF have been involved in, as well as an overlapping one between ITOPF and SANCCOB that Monica also presented on. And Monica also then did a few really interesting case studies throughout the history of SANCCOB to bring that topic to life. Then also we looked at the different tiers of response and the importance of evaluating that and bringing that into your contingency plan. And then really how to set up a national oil wildlife contingency plan, because that was one of the main objectives, is what are the next steps and how do we move that discussion forward. I think next slide. Do you want to step in here, Monica, or yeah?
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. So yeah, just to set the scene, I mean, I'm pretty sure most people are aware of this, but Nigeria has a chronic, or putting it very mildly, oil spill problem with, I think, over 200 oil spills a year, give or take, and that is what's reported. So they have so many that they've created this site called Oil Spill Monitor. Anyone can go look at it, and you can go and see all the spills that have been reported, according to the source of the spill, what happened in the spill. It's a really, really great tool, actually, and it's very interesting. It does not have much discussion around wildlife impacts or anything like that, but it really does give you a nice idea as to what was spilled, where it was spilled, and the reason behind the spill. So there's like a little snapshot in the corner there of one of the spills and a summary of what's been done. So you can kind of go back in time as well. It gets very blurry after a while because I just have so many, and the number exceeds more than I even ever realized it. In terms of wildlife impact, So we know the environmental impact is severe. You can just Google oil spills in Nigeria and you will see a lot of articles around where fishing communities have claimed a massive loss on their ability to fish, the ability to consume fish, pollution of their water supplies, and the toxic effects that go along with that in terms of a human health perspective. But in terms of actual numbers of wildlife affected, that number is really unknown. They don't really quantify how much wildlife are affected. For many responders, it's just not safe enough to respond or not possible to respond because of the dangers of being, kidnapped or attacked or anything like that. So there really isn't a great idea as to what their wildlife is looking like either. They don't have this old wildlife contingency plan, and their national oil spill contingency plan has a very loose mention of wildlife in it. But they really wanted to sort of make the shift from just covering oil spills and be a lot more proactive when it comes to wildlife. There's been a big push by the government recently, and as Lauren mentioned, it was the request of government, of NOSDRA, to have this workshop, and they approached GI-WACAF, and this was actually the first time that GI-WACAF had done a workshop on wildlife. Normally, they focus their workshops on things such as dispersant policies, drafting national oil spill contingency plans, but this was very targeted at wildlife. So it was really great that GI-WACAF did this and that Nigeria stepped up to the plate. They've got a long journey ahead of them, but it was really exciting to be part of this. And the people in the room were very passionate and very excited and very eager to get the process going. So that was a huge positive. So we asked them, this is one of the interactive things that we did. We asked, people, what do you think of when you hear the word old wildlife response? Because I've seen some very interesting interpretations in my time. And it was really great to see, in this word cloud, the words that really came up, such as wildlife conservation, protection, rescue, that people are thinking along those lines. And I was amazed to see words like protection, preservation, and not just, I thought, the word that would probably dominate is response. And I see it didn't really even feature. Purely because people just seem to think it all starts at response and they don't think about the preparedness that goes into it beforehand and just wait for people to swoop in and save the day. So it was really great to see that that was not the thinking that I got, and I was quite excited actually of that. So one of the really cool things that we did is these interactive discussions. So I'll talk to the first two that were done, and then I'll hand over to Lauren briefly to touch on the session that she did. But basically, we divided the participants into groups. Obviously, with 126 participants, you need to manage your groups, and to have discussions is very difficult. So we created these groups. We created the groups, so each group had a representation of different organizations, which allowed for better discussion. So we try to make sure it wasn't just like one government agency altogether, but they were split between the tables. So the very first activity they did was to identify activities that may cause an oil spill and to list the risks associated with it. So that was really fascinating for me because it was not just, production and extraction that were highlighted as a risk for the area, but things such as the transportation of crude oil, something that's emerging in the area, has been using these barges to transport oil because the pipelines keep getting sabotaged and they're losing millions of dollars just in theft alone. And so how they've had to shift their practices and now also moving further offshore and what new risks that could bring to the front. And then another one that was discussed quite a bit was also just old facilities that haven't been maintained well, have been abandoned, have been left, and the risk that they pose to the environment as there's no sort of containment of whatever oil is left behind there, and things like that, as well as human error. And once they had those risks, we then had a really nice, so one of the days earlier in the week, we actually asked the NGOs and the local government to present on the biodiversity in the area. So one of the NGOs actually did a really great presentation about what is the biodiversity of Nigeria, what's the status, where the risks lie and the species lie, and it was just a really nice overview of what they've been doing. And so it fed into this exercise where we wanted them to really look at what areas and species is the most at risk. So a huge component of an old wildlife contingency plan is your risk assessment, and then your species and habitat assessment. We'd love to conserve everything, but sometimes very difficult conversations have to be had as to where you focus your priorities, and it's better to do that before there's an incident. So they looked at, in their groups, what areas and species they felt, and then provided some supporting reasoning and what was the barriers to being able to respond in that area or for that species. And again, like the previous group, we had one person present back, and just a summary of some of the things that they discussed in that group. One of the key areas, and it's probably not surprising many people, is the Niger Delta, due to the presence of several sensitive habitats like mangroves and species such as turtles, and because it is the hub for oil and gas operations in Nigeria. Challenges included inaccessibility, cultural perceptions. So animals are not viewed as something worth saving in Nigeria. They're an extractable resource that can be consumed or harvested. And how do you change that narrative? Funding and obviously corruption and violence were a major barrier to the resources required to respond, range from training to equipment. So we really didn't want to just highlight what's going wrong, but also what can be done to solve the problem. And so those discussions were really great to see how people got sort of conversing in the room, and there was sort of very polarizing views as to the actual status of the ecosystem in Nigeria and whether or not it's sort of past the point of no return versus it's worth saving. It was very polarized views on that point. So it was quite fascinating to see just amongst themselves where people's thinking lied. So those were the two sessions I did. So I'm just going to hand over to Lauren to talk about the exercise that she did with the group. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. So the exercise that I ran was a scenario-based tabletop exercise. So during the presentations that Monica and I gave, we highlighted the different variables that can go into how wildlife can be impacted differently by different types of incidents, and also the different vulnerabilities and sensitivities that each species or each group of wildlife may have. So I wanted to bring that a bit more into life and get the participants thinking about if they were faced with a real-time event, how they would prioritize different species and how they would actually go about organizing an oiled wildlife response. So again, we worked with the same groups. I think there were 10 groups from different organizations and different representatives of each group. And they were given a bit of a live scenario. So they were each given a different scenario of a ship spill incident with different sensitivities highlighted to them. And then throughout the afternoon, we gave them new information with which to react to. And at the end of the exercise, we had a participant from each group present on their main findings, so what their response techniques were and why, what resources they required, some of the pros and cons for their choices, and also why they made those decisions. And it was really just to bring into context what we've been training over the next few days and take forward what they need to think about when they're drafting their oiled wildlife contingency plan.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, it was a really nice way to, I think, wrap up the sort of week's training and, as Lauren says, contextualize what we've been doing and help them visualize it. I think they also realized that it's very hard to think on the go. And if you need to have some things agreed on before an event, because during an event, you've got to move so fast. And it was like, for some of the groups, they were still trying to figure one thing out, and then we would add an inject and they would realize, oh, they're taking too long. So it was a really nice way to push people to understand the importance of planning and contingency before an event and not waiting for the event to take place, which was really great. So some of the key points that we really got from it was, there was really, really good engagement from the participants. We did like a survey at the end, and people really felt that the workshop was engaging. They liked the way the topics were presented, the interactive sessions. They really found those useful and beneficial, the exercise, the quizzes that we did. It was just a nice way to keep people on track, to keep people focused, and to be involved in the conversation. The only sort of real learning that the big learning that we took from it was to really involve more people from a local perspective, which is often quite difficult when you're dealing with a country where there's not much oiled wildlife response focus. There's no dedicated organization that deals with oiled wildlife. There isn't even a sort of an NGO that can rescue wildlife, specifically marine wildlife, and those that do operate are either very terrestrial based or very limited in scope because of the risks associated with it. And even just finding examples on or data on the spills in Nigeria was really hard. I picked one or two examples of ones that had made the media because of the quantity of oil spilled and the impact that was believed to have occurred, but there isn't sort of this beautiful measurable data that you see in some other spills that happen over the world, where you get a nice trend picture of exactly what's happened and you can show wildlife effects and how planning comes into that. So yeah, it was really, I think, a very successful workshop, and we had involved some local expertise, but I think possibly even involving more locals into the facilitation in future would have just added a bit more of sort of a unifying factor to the workshop, and also they could have pointed out some of the things. So, one of the examples was in our case studies. One of the comments that we got during the workshop was that we were very focused on African penguins, or penguins in general, not just African penguins, but penguins. And it was just because some of the bigger wildlife responses, and obviously SANCCOB has responded to wildlife incidents involving African penguins. And for Nigeria, that's not really applicable because they don't have those birds there. So we had to quickly put together some presentations where we highlighted impacts beyond just the penguins, and covering some more global incidents where there was data to show that turtles and marine mammals and other birds that Nigeria would encounter more often are involved in that incident. So that was a really good learning to take forward. And I think when we did the update with the new information, that was very well received. One of the things I did request was training. We really spent a lot of time emphasizing the need to build, sort of that tier 1, tier 2 capacity, to really, I think you'll see it in the week that lies ahead now, that preparedness wheel of, not just focusing on someone coming in to save the day, but to really build your resources in country and to grow the knowledge of what people have and do not have in country and to invest in it. So to sort of close off the project, we wrote a report which is available on the GI-WACAF's website, and it's not a very long report, so it's a nice overview of what the workshop was about, but also some key recommendations that we made for the Nigerian government to take forward to write this contingency plan. And just some of the high level things that I flagged in that report was, stakeholder engagement from the start, having these workshops where you identify your risks and you map out your sensitivities, and then you have these conversations about developing your contingency plans. Where would you put a facility? How would it look? Where would you put your areas to collect? And what sort of equipment do you need to stockpile? How do you stockpile it from a safety perspective, specifically in the context of Nigeria? And what do you need going forward? And to have those conversations continuously, but to keep your team that actually drafts the plan quite small, so you don't have too much involvement, because then a plan I've seen in many cases it never ends up getting finished because there's just too many voices. And then to connect with experts that have done this before to help guide and shape the plan, and to make sure it integrates with your overall response strategy. Lauren highlighted it at the start that we really wanted to highlight that oiled wildlife response is part of oil spill response, not separate. And it needs to be thought of in that context always. We often find still it's getting much better, but in many instances, oiled wildlife response is still sort of second thought, or unless there's a major wildlife impact, then wildlife response gets thrown into the spotlight. But when it comes to planning and preparedness and all of that, it still takes a very much a back foot, and we need to constantly push the narrative that it's part of the broader oil spill response strategy and should be part of preparedness. So wildlife response should form part of exercises that are conducted. A wildlife response should form part of training initiatives that are arranged. Wildlife response should be part of workshops and conferences, so that it kind of defines that narrative, that it's integrated. And then industry support was raised as a key to the progression of the plans. Obviously, a key barrier is resources. This workshop was made possible through, funding of provided by GI-WACAF, and many countries around the world just don't have the money to pay for developing these plans or getting the experts on board. And so one of the case studies I presented was actually how industry has lent a helping hand in the preparedness work in Namibia for wildlife. And it's literally, it's through a collaboration between SANCCOB, the NGOs and industry, providing some of that financial support that has actually resulted in progress in that country in quite a significant and measurable way, and was sort of the catalyst for launching into developing a national oiled wildlife contingency plan for Namibia, and doing some training and getting some equipment into that country, and a range of other initiatives. So we really just to highlight that if people come together and work together collaborate together, and even industry takes the ownership of the fact that what they do is dangerous, and what they do can harm the environment, and to sort of contribute as well to minimizing that footprint and that risk levels is important in preparedness. So yeah, with that, and then I don't know, Lauren, if you have anything else you want to add, otherwise, yeah, done. Okay, no, nothing else to add. Then I hand back to Frankii.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lauren, and also Monica. That was really interesting, and I really, I think I just picked up on a couple of things you said there, just about how industry can be that catalyst for integrating wildlife into preparedness, and yeah, particularly in areas of the world where funds are low. So yeah, I found that really resonated with me, and something that, you know, we try and take forward in OSRL to facilitate these sorts of workshops, but really, really interesting to hear that. So yeah, gonna invite any questions from our attendees here, but I'll just take the opportunity to ask one of myself. One of the first things you spoke about was that website, the Nigerian oil spill monitoring website. And yeah, that surprised me. It just indicates that they are, you know, very open and transparent about the amount of spills they've got in Nigeria. I don't know if anybody in the workshop was sort of like part of that initiative, or did they indicate a willingness to include wildlife in that sort of data collection? I appreciate, like you said, the security situation might not allow it, but is that something they're looking to do in the future?
I think the database was raised to us by the participants, but I can't remember from what sector or in what context. Yeah. So yeah, so it was yeah, we were quite surprised that it was that readily available as well. So it's quite shocking to log on and have a quick play around. I mean, the screenshot there is just from the last 4 or 5 weeks. So quite a few incidents that happened, and that was obviously a key topic that kept coming up over the workshop was we have this chronic problem, and it is a security risk that we can't respond to. So, you know, where do we need to focus our attentions on? I see Rob has asked in the chat, what's the long-term plan and what's next? Monica, I don't know if you want a best place to perhaps answer this, or I can
try.
Yeah.
So after we issued the report, I believe they were going to go back to whoever in government makes these decisions to decide to take it forward. They did, unfortunately, when we went, have elections and a major reshuffle in government just as we left, the announcement was made. So that seems to have delayed some progress on it. But I know that there was some discussions, continued discussions within GI-WACAF, amongst GI-WACAF and some of the industry bodies, to try and champion pushing for the project to be completed. I believe they were aiming to work on it into next year, which is 2024. They had set up a committee to start drafting it, and they were going to reach out when they were kind of ready at that stage. So I haven't heard anything further on that, but yeah, it is one of those things where you need a champion, and there were a few people that we met at the workshop that really seemed passionate about it, and I hope that they are still in the position to champion it, because otherwise all the other competing socioeconomic things are going to distract from the real point of it. But just on the platform, yeah, it's an initiative of, I mean, the National Oil Spill Detection Agency. I mean, that was set up because of the sheer volume of spills. It's a government organization for it, but they were very transparent at the workshop about their challenges, their gaps, their weaknesses. There was no sort of trying to hide behind or explain away or any excuses whatsoever. They were very open with how they're struggling. And I think if they knew what to collect for wildlife impacts and they knew how to collect it, they would probably do it. I just think they don't know, and they don't know where to start, and they don't know how to start. And so I think you know, that's probably a conversation that could potentially happen quite easily, and with a little bit of guidance, even if they don't respond, just getting an idea or getting photos and evidence from other people, which is probably, I mean, some of the spills that they deal with, they don't even go validate. It's just reports that they get because they can't go to that area without a military escort or something like that. So on the website, it will say whether it was the government that vetted the spill or whether it was other people that reported it or whether it was an industry that reported it.
Wow, yeah, that's so interesting, and like so maybe quite far removed from what we're used to seeing in terms of a lot of the spills that we go to. Obviously we can get there boots on the ground, but yeah, when you're having spills that you don't even, not even sure that they're really there or to what extent, yeah, that just shows the gaps that are there, and it needs to be sorted, really. Yeah, that's quite shocking that the screenshot that you shared was just from the last 3 or 4 weeks. That really does put it into perspective, and just how many of them are inland. And yeah, I think I just want to highlight the fact that, you know, we're always pushing for that tiered capability to response. And where there is no tier 1 or tier 2 capability, then that's when it really puts the pressure on the tier 3 and the services that OSRL will offer to our members for that, you know, the wildlife SLA services. So yeah, that's really interesting. I'm gonna just pop out. Is there anybody else with any more questions? Please feel free to unmute your mic as well. Hopefully you've got the ability to do that on here. I might have missed it, guys, but did you say whether industry was invited or was it mostly governmental stakeholders?
Yeah, they were invited. So there were some energy companies representative present that have a stake in Nigeria, and they were quite vocal and interactive as well, in a quite a positive way in the workshop. So hence why the discussion, I think, about that moniker sort of made more prominent was that industry can get involved rather than just sit on the sidelines in this particular context as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and absolutely crucial, I would argue. I'm in the process at the minute of organising a workshop in Argentina that brings together industry and government, and I think that's just the sort of environment where you're going to have the greatest gains by having those parties together, and NGOs as well, as that sort of like third arm, because everything's all connected. So yeah, I can't see any other questions in the chat, so I will just say thank you to both Monica and also Lauren for just taking the time to present this, such an important topic, and also thank you so much for kicking Wildlife Week off. It's been great to have you here, and I am unashamedly going to do a bit of a plug for the rest of the week's activities. So in our external webinars then, we've got one on Thursday, which is our first Spanish-speaking webinar. So quite a good addition that we've got this week. It's going to give an overview of our wildlife response and preparedness in Spanish, and we've got guest speakers Daniela from Sea Alarm and also Valeria from IUCA taking part in that. On Friday, there's a webinar that focuses on the Asia Pacific region and how different sort of players in the region over there have taken on this preparedness journey, and a journey it is. So yeah, quite a few people from internal OSRL are going to deliver that, and about how we can integrate wildlife into the rest of our response, and like into the incident management team and IMS system. And we're also going to have Louise Chilvers from Wild Based Massey University on that, and some people from Petronas as well. So that's quite a big one. That is going to be 2 hours, and yeah, very much targeted towards the Asia Pacific region with the timing. So it's at 5 a.m. UTC. And then we've also got one on Friday afternoon, sort of flipping to the other side of the world, with a focus on Brazil in South America, where we've got Rodrigo and Barbara from Petrobras talking about how they've successfully incorporated wildlife not only into their contingency plan, but they are now at the stage of sort of like integrating wildlife into their oil spill exercises. So throughout the week, we're kind of trying to go full circle, sort of starting from that planning here on Monday all the way to exercising on Friday. So yeah, that one on Friday is at 1:30 UTC. And yeah, I very much hope that you'll take the opportunity to join us for the rest of the week. But I think that's all for now, unless anybody's got anything to add. Okay. Thank you again, Monica, and thank you again, Lauren. And yeah, we will be posting this recording sort of externally so people can watch back later. So yeah, thank you very much.